I
Well,
hope.
we'll both say good morning,
Good morning, everyone.
for, because that's what it is where I am. Um,
Same here.
I'm Akua Leslie Hope, and I'm speaking to you from the ancestral lands of the Onondaga, also known as the Seneca, keepers of the Western Door, in the area called currently the Southern Finger Lakes region of New York State. And I pay homage to the Seneca, past, present, and future, as I do to my own ancestors, by whose grace I exist and am sustained. Brandon?
Hello, everyone. I'm Brandon O'Brien. I'm a poet, writer, game designer from Trinidad and Tobago. I am very honored to be here.
And here she is.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I was having trouble logging onto WebEx. It was not working for me.
You're not wrong.
It was working last night. It was great, but now, okay.
WebEx
Well,
does those things.
oh my goodness. Well, I guess we've started now, or we should be starting around now. Apologies.
I just did a land acknowledgement. I didn't introduce myself or anything, but Brandon started introducing himself.
Okay, I'm sorry. Please continue, Brandon.
Yeah, poet, writer, game designer, and also the former poetry editor of the Hugo Award-winning magazine Fire. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here and chat with these two lovely folks about speculative poetry.
I'll go backwards then. I'm a cool Leslie Hope, and I'm a poet author who also writes short fiction. And I edited the first BIPOC speculative collection, so history making, last October. It was launched called Nombono. It's available from Sundress Publications for free. I'll post information on that. And I also edited the historic largest ever issue of Eye to the Telescope, number 42 on the Sea, also available for free online. And my collection, Otherwares, won the 2021 Elgin Award. And this year I won 10 grand to create Afrofuturist pastoral speculative poetry. I'm editing 2 new anthologies that I hope everyone will submit to, one on speculative cats and another on speculative trees. And I am grateful to Flights of Foundry for enabling us to have this discussion. And I'm gratified to be here with these two fabulous poets, both of whose work I'm familiar with. When I try to present in my series, Speculative Sundays reading series, and when I did get to present in the Speculative Sundays reading series. And so if you want to see many new working poets, including any number of Black poets, please look for the Speculative Sundays reading series. It's on YouTube, it's recorded. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just say a little bit about myself. My name is Therese Mason Pierre. I am a poet and a writer. I write I write in different genres. I do spec, I do, literary fiction, I do creative nonfiction. I do poetry as well, speculative poetry. I'm having a really great time in this space. I'm the co-editor-in-chief of Augur magazine, which is a Canadian speculative literature journal. And we put out issues and we have a great time there. So I'm going to be the moderator for this discussion. Thank you so much to Akua and Brandon for joining me. It's not the first time I've been on panels with both of you, so I'm very excited. I'm very excited. Thank you also, Akua, to all you do for the speculative poetry community and for Black speculative poets. Like, you're working so, so hard, and I just admire everything you do.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You did not mention that your wonderful collection was nominated for an Elgin and placed for an Elgin last year.
oh yeah, yes. My chapbook manifest was third place in Elgin Award, which I was very excited about because I was like, I didn't think that it would get that far. So, so we're here today to talk about sort of Black speculative poetry, Afrofuturism, Afrofantasy, and all of that good stuff. So I'm just gonna hop right into our sort of structured questions. If any of you want to like jump in or like take the conversation in like a slightly different way, totally fine. We're here to vibe. We're here to have a good time. So before we talk about Black speculative poetics, I want to talk to you about or speak about Black poetics more broadly. So I want to ask, what drew you to Black poetry? And by Black poetry, I mean poetry written by Black people, about Black people, and about uniquely Black experiences. So how did you get into all of that?
What's interesting to me, and I don't want to make claims that you can both correct me if I'm wrong, but we're all not only from the African diaspora, but we're also from the Caribbean diaspora, all three of us. And so you'll understand when I say that as a second generation born in the US, but all four grandparents migrated from two islands, Montserrat and Jamaica. And their orientation, their cultural orientation was to literacy and to eloquence. And so I grew up hearing poetry, but particularly you made me reflect on this. So thank you for letting us know that you were going to ask this. My father's junior high school teacher was the Black poet County Cullen, who also lived in his building in Harlem. And so in my home of origin, there was County Cullen's books, there was Gwendolyn Brooks, and I'm trying to think of the third poet who is the third Black poet. The name escapes me at the moment. Oh, and Claude McKay. And it was a great honor also to talk about Claude McKay. For those who don't know what I'm referencing, Claude McKay's poem, If We Must Die, was used to rally the British during World War II. This fabulous Caribbean American poet's words. So, and County Cullen, for those who don't know, was a poet of great significance during the Harlem Renaissance. So those were my beginnings from before I was literate. And it was in the language, it was in the music. They listened to calypso, which I always love to tell people. Calypso is the basis for rap, you know. Um, it was in my surround there. In a way, I felt predestined for that. But my forebears, when I began to choose, I I identified deeply with Gwendolyn Brooks. Um, and I'm trying to think, who did I love? Because I started writing from before I could write. So Gwendolyn Brooks was among my first, Sterling Brown. And in high school, I met Negritude and reconnected to the Caribbean in that way through Aimé Césaire, who was my favorite of the Negritude poets.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Brandon? Who were your Black poets?
Well, as for me, I want to say it's particularly serendipitous that Akua mentioned Calypso, um, because that was what I was thinking about when you like posed the question the first time. Because living in the Caribbean, essentially all of the poetics that you encounter are Black poetics or the poetics of people in color more broadly. All of the music that I'm listening to, all of the books that I'm reading that are from the region are steeped in Caribbean blackness so strongly that I never even really thought before this point about um, whether that was like a deliberate consumption choice that I was making or whether that was affecting my work. It was just already
Mhm.
in the air that my work was breathing.
Mhm.
Um, which is particularly telling because a lot of when I started out writing poetry, I wasn't, in part because of that lack of awareness, I wasn't writing to that until I started doing
Mhm.
performance
Mhm.
poetry in high school. Um, in like the early history of performance poetry in Trinidad and Tobago was incredibly steeped in blackness, and that was a thing that I rediscovered
Mhm.
when I started doing slams here in Trinidad, starting speaking to other poets my age as well as my elders about the significance of that kind of work, and that's when it kind of took shape in my brain that I was speaking to a history instead of just wildly writing things.
Mhm.
Um, and it was that kind of appreciation that helped me understand more deeply that I wasn't just writing for myself, but I'm writing for other people to potentially gain a kind of understanding. And as a result, I had a responsibility to my own understanding. And that's what helped me um, like consider the history of the region more deeply, consider the history of the art form more deeply, and pushed me to read more and discover more about what I want my work to do.
That's really great. We're going to come back to that, I think, responsibility aspect a little bit
Mhm.
later. But now I think we can sort of like delve into like the panel description. um, so I want to ask next, you know, I think a lot about how whenever like a Black person is doing a thing, it becomes like a Black thing, right? So whenever we see a Black person writing, sci-fi or fantasy, it becomes Afrofuturism automatically. It becomes Afrofantasy immediately. Um, and those are all, labels that are really great and useful for a lot of people and a lot of marketers, I guess. But I, I want to ask you, can or should we attempt to define Black speculative poetry? And do you think that there is any sort of merit to this kind of classification, especially for Black people? I mean, also for readers of this work, but especially for Black people. I'll start with you, Brandon. Sorry.
So this is an interesting question to me. Like I think a lot about the terms that people use to describe black art and the origins of those words. I've been on a panel. I've been on a panel on Afrofuturism two years in a row. Where one of my opening thoughts is I am very glad that there are people who find value in this word. There are works of mine that find value in that word. But I always am curiously aware of the fact that the word wasn't coined by a black writer. Um,
I
and
was going to
makes me
say that. Thank you.
Yeah, and it makes me really wary about the words that people use to describe black art because if we're not defining it on our own terms and having internal conversations through various versions of the African diaspora about how we define work, then marketers are just kind of using us as to prop up their own financial gain, and that's not to say anything against money. I like money too, but um, I feel like it is far more important for individual writers to define their work on their own terms and have their own cultural and craft based understandings of what those terms are supposed to mean and what they're supposed to give value to. Um, like I think that what is ultimately most important is that there is a dichotomy between the fact that all black work work made by Black creators is uniquely Black in a way that means something to that writer and to the people that they're trying to reach. And there are people who are attaching the word Black to Black art to mean something about Blackness that is not necessarily the truth for all Black people in general, all Black creators in general, or even the work in question. Um, and the communities are supposed to have the conversation about how we uh engage with those definitions are supposed to be Black people. Um, and I think that as we are nearing the point where people are trying to understand more about some of those genres and those definitions, we are getting to the point where people are relying on Black people to engage with that, especially in a scholarly level. Um, but in a lot of ways, in a lot of in particular in like the marketing sense, in the book production sense, that conversation isn't really happening in a lot of like major publishers and stuff like that. And I hope that we get to the point where it is.
And what are your thoughts, Akua?
Brandon said so much that made me want to re-unpack it, because my thoughts began with the idea that when I first wrote speculative poetry in sixth grade, I did not call it speculative poetry even. And when I talk to people about the term speculative, um, that the first literature was speculative literature, right? That the thing exists without the label. And I also thought about how the first creators of jazz did not call it jazz, and the first creators of blues did not call it blues. And to what extent do you um, ever want to attach to it? The name for anything is just often a a key for other people to understand what it is that you're creating. Um, so I came up in a time when attaching Black, the word Black to my production as a poet and a person was was very was very important, was an affirmation, was a revolutionary act to assert that I was a Black poet. I come right after the Black arts movement when I'm growing up. So I'm talking about the 70s as a young poet in New York City, saying, I'm creating for the people, and the people in particular that I'm creating for are Black people. Um, so there are those thoughts that swirl around, knowing that in I think it was 93, a guy named Mark Derry said, oh, um, here, you know, Afrofuturism. And I've always seen Black life as speculative because it's because of the conditions under which Black people endure and experience life. Are just that fantastic, you know, are just that awful. And so there's that about it that's like, ooh, that makes it even worse to love the term when it's defined by our lack versus our bounty, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the same way that we took the term Black and attached it to ourselves and endowed it with greatness and beauty, we could do the same with Afrofuturism should we choose to. And a number of people have. And they posit that it simply means that they envision those of the African diaspora existing in the future.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add to that because um, Akua reminded me of something. Like I discovered something very brilliant earlier this week. Um, there's this astounding writer named D. Scott Miller who wrote a document called the Afro Surreal Manifesto, which I hadn't heard
Mhm.
about before. Um, Once I discovered that was a thing, I just became innately connected to it. And like one of the like tenets of Afro Surrealism is the idea that existing in life as a black person is already uniquely weird, that strange
Right.
things
Mhm.
are
Yes.
part of our
Yep.
life all the time, and it's simply
Right.
a matter of documenting that and being honest to that strangeness. Um, and while, as you said, Akua, there is like something potentially heartbreaking about having that framed in a sense that is obviously uh, coming from a kind of lack, acknowledging a kind of obvious abject suffering. There is something very freeing sometimes in being able to say, I know that this is the case, so I'm just going to show it to you. And you know exactly what this thing is, that it is both real and existing in a kind of unreality that is only unreal because this is something that someone who is not black has never experienced before, but everybody
Parallel.
else,
Yes.
yeah. When I heard that, in my brain, like I imagined it as a kind of, you know how when two people from the same place meet each other in a different place and just give each other the nod to let
Yes.
everybody to let you know that you are being seen in this moment. It felt like there are genres of black art that are giving me the nod, and
Absolutely.
I appreciate that very deeply.
And there are these folks south of me in the US who have created the Black speculative arts movement and to involve poets, um, artists, visual artists, filmmakers. Cherie is a part of that, right? And I'm forgetting the name of the other gentleman who's an academic who's written about it um, extensively, who proselytizes also. So, um, and they don't seem to mind also using Afrofuturism, but they've reframed it in this Black speculative arts movement. How beautiful. That sounds so beautiful. I love those words.
Yeah.
Um,
I like this conversation has been like I my thoughts are bursting right now because I I had never really realized that how much of what what you were saying and the academics and the writers that you were referencing was true. Like it makes me this conversation makes me think about like Jordan Peele's movies and that particular kind of horror because like it's a horror that I can watch because I'm like, oh yes, the unreality, the reality and reality. Yeah, I'm like, this
Mhm.
is not this is not particularly like frightening to me. um or but it also makes me think about like other kinds of black joy. This kind of leads into my next question, um which is that the speculative in general, Brandon, you mentioned it being somewhat freeing. I consider it freeing as well. It's so deeply tied to the imagined and the boundless, like anything can really happen within the speculative. So I wanted to ask, what you believe the speculative as a concept does for like black narrative. And you touched upon this already. Like, what do you believe it does for black narratives and voices, and what it allows sort of black writers to imagine or reflect on more deeply. But in particular, what kinds of thinking, and work you think emerges from this kind of imagination for black folks specifically?
Mhm. Well, I think first and foremost it gives us the capacity to imagine the breadth of our own freedom. Um, like I think when you phrase that, it helped me realize a thing that is sometimes very like shocking and depressing about the way that speculative fiction is often viewed in public space. It's not always true because there is a wealth of work happening all over the genre. Um, but very often there is this kind of um like focus on the dystopian, which is obviously very valuable, but it means that there is this focus on a portion of stories within this genre that are committed to the idea of imagining how people can suffer their worst suffering. Um, and that's particularly important as a black writer because um, that's a thing that's already happening to marginalized people all the time. I remember at this may have either been at a panel or in a private conversation with Nalo Hopkinson, absolutely brilliant Caribbean writer, who said, "We have always lived in the apocalypse." Um,
Mm-hmm.
because there is a kind of abject tragedy that is part of our history, unfortunately, and part of the history of many marginalized people as well. And often there is a portion of speculative fiction that is, especially when it is written not by those marginalized people, that is an attempt to imagine how more they can suffer. um, Whereas um, a great portion of the black speculative literature that I've read, and especially poetry, is about imagining what it looks like when that stops happening or never happened. What it looks for us to engage fully with our dignity in a world that continually tries to deprive us of it. Um, like one of the things that I consider most beautiful about, and I literally have the collection with me right here. Don't Call Us Dead by Dennis Smith. Who I'm sure they don't
Love that
consider
book.
them. It's a brilliant
Have
book, right?
read it.
Love that book.
Absolutely.
Ah,
I speak
ah.
about this. I speak about this collection so often because Deleuze is a literary poet. Is like established in the literary poetic sphere. But one of the opening poems in this collection, "Summer Somewhere," is just the obviously speculative imagining of what it would be like to live in a world where black boys don't die.
Mm.
Um, and that in itself is like uniquely radical because you're coming into it from the world that we're already in, knowing that there's a kind of suffering that is um being visited upon black bodies on a regular basis, and then you enter this poem and go, this would be very beautiful and everyone deserves it. um and that kind of energy in black speculative work, that there is a dignity that we deserve and I'm about to describe it to you, is very beautiful to me, and I like engaging with it as often as possible. So yeah, that's what's in my brain at the moment.
I think about the idea, the the powerful, motivating, inspiring outpouring that welled up when Black people across America in particular met Wakanda. When Black people from America in particular, and perhaps even Canada, journey to the Caribbean. When Black people who are particularly oppressed, denied, derided, excluded, experience a, a Black space that does not seem to be as oppressive, that was not, when you imagine never having been colonized, always being independent, like where is that, right? It exists at the tips of our pens and in our thoughts. And so it's almost like there's this further, um, at least for me, given my particular psychosocial history, responsibility to, um, even if I must in some way report the constraints, I need to do it in a way that liberates. If even as I even as I want to record what I experience around me, which is, racial violence and denial, that through my work, I'm going to do it in such a render it in such a way that it's still transforming, that it's still liberating. So I so here with Brandon, imagining that what happens now never is, but also um, rendering what happens now in such a way that it's not just more, as my sister told me, this term about black torture porn. You know,
Mhm.
there's like uh, to my mind, this new it's not named, but let's name it, because naming a thing also identifies it. And when you identify it, that's the other thing about naming. When you name it, you identify it, and then you can work on it, amend it, and you see it when it happens. So there's this new genre of what to my mind is black torture porn. Those are the things that are getting supported. There's a film I know I cannot see, the a black woman at a white university, which is my entire academic experience, um, who's set upon by racist monsters from the past. That was triggering. So yes, in our work, um, to both acknowledge that reality and transform that reality.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull quotes from what you both were saying. I'm like, oh, this is so great. Um, I understand recognizing and understanding the sort of like black sort of trauma porn got me thinking about sort of suffering and dystopian in general, and there's a sense that like the dark and the well, I shouldn't say the dark, like the terrible and the suffering is somehow more realistic. And I'm just looking for like, um, joy. So I try to find like joy where I can. Um, I like something that you said, Brandon, about, there's a dignity that we deserve, and I'm going to describe it to you. And I just thought that was just so beautiful. Um, I want to ask you both, um, like if in your personal work, like you're both writers, you have several books and things like that. I wanted to know how you interact with or not the traditions and the histories and your own personal experiences of blackness, whatever that means to you in your own speculative poetry.
Well, all the time. Um, I worked with a group of writers. Um, let's see. I worked on creating the Black Writers Guild. This is way back in the 70s with Baraka. And then another group of us created the new Renaissance Writers Guild. And so I come from the idea that I have certain psychosocial imperatives, and those psychosocial imperatives are to um, liberate my people. And so um, that informs everything I do. Like, okay, let me break it down a different way. Um, Writing for me is spiritual practice. It's why I'm here. Like that fabulous song that I love by James Taylor. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. And that's the way through which I um, understand the world and change the world and help the world and save the world and help my people and save my people. My greatest honor has not been any award ever, but when people say, so and so died, will you write something? I'm getting married. Will you read at my wedding? I mean, my medals are that I've created poems for 3 weddings, 3 marriages, and all of them lasted. And people, get in touch with me years later and say, um, you know, that poem about us, that was right. We're still together, and it's, decades later. So there's that. But there's something we said earlier. If I wanted to jump back to, um, I don't remember how to pronounce it. I'm aged. It's Are you familiar with the whole Drexia construct? So so it's that kind of transformation. So yeah, um, the idea that the Black people bemoaned in Zong, who were tossed over from slave ships, so that oh, it was for insurance purposes to make money. So this is cargo. We discard it. Those people transformed into mer people who exist, and there's a civilization. And from that idea and construct, from that total rewrite of tragedy, comes this incredible um, sea civilization and music. And uh, and the folks who constructed this were from Detroit. Uh, they reworked the pain and tragedy into something just so absolutely stunning as to almost undo, the originating horror. And so I write to undo our originating horrors.
Hmm. Um, I like that closing phrase very much because I think I am attempting to write in the same vein. But I think one of the things that I think I particularly want to uh hold as often as possible in my work um is that there is a way that we can subvert the narratives of tragedy that have been told about us.
Yep.
Um, like I am still ultimately delighted in Can You Sign My Tentacle? Like every once in a while, I will just look at this book and go, "This was a thing that I made." In part because the thing that gives me the most joy about the book is just the idea that I took this entire mythos written by someone who like had a lot of hate in his heart for uh, black people and other people of color, and went, what if these things no longer belong to you? Um, and I feel like there is a lot of like radical energy in being able to tell um, stories about discovering that the things that have belonged to the people who have tried to oppress us don't belong to them anymore, or sometimes even didn't belong to them at
Never did.
all.
Thank you. I was just gonna thank you.
Yeah, like there you really want to tell me that there is something bigger and more powerful than me and that it doesn't care about me? Nah, it cares about me a lot.
Spirit, walk with me.
Yeah, because if it didn't care, I wouldn't still be here.
Wouldn't
My
be here.
ancestors wouldn't have provided the energy for me to still
Yes.
be here.
Yes.
Um and I think that there is a kind of um again a kind of responsibility to tell those kinds of stories. There was a collection that I was working on before Can You Sign My Tentacle like materialized, because all of that was kind of like a fever dream in order to actually meet Interstellar's deadline. Um, where I was kind of motivated by the same energy that I was trying to speak to, like the history of European fairy tales through the language of Caribbean folklore. Specifically because I
Mm.
wanted to have conversations about the distinction between which kind of fairy tales become more real or more valid than someone else's. Which ones do we consider true or have the capacity to reveal the truth. And in particular, how we approach the idea of monstrosity in a culture where if you're black, you have a level of monstrosity attached to you that doesn't belong to you. And I kind of went through that process going, well, what if it did belong to me? And what if that was good? What if
That
embracing
was
my monstrosity
strength.
was more powerful and more
Strength.
beautiful
Yes,
than
yes, yeah.
just attempting to perform someone else's beauty? And I think that that's the kind of energy that I want to engage with in my work. Um, that there is a kind of mutiny essentially in taking that which belonged to the people who attempted to destroy us and go, this is mine now.
Well, again, by using the very word black, we are doing that. At this
Sure.
time, there was a point in time in history when black people did not want to be known as being black. I never experienced that. I'm the granddaughter of Garveyites who always embraced the term black. But I, as a that was only a word I could use in my house. So I mean, I'm way older than both of you. I grew up only being able to say I was black in my house, because no one else around me even attached to the word black, except there were many thinkers out there. There were people in other parts of the world and people in other parts of even the culture who embraced their blackness, right? So I've seen that it was never my struggle, for which thank you, ancestors, that was not something I had to get to. It's something I already had, but I there was there was a line between what you can say in one space and what you can't say in another space. And what I'm delighted about what we're taking on by even talking about Black speculative poetry is not even to confine it, but to say to own all the space, to occupy all the space.
Yeah.
Oh, this is such a great. I'm looking at the time now. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is such a great conversation. I think
Oh my
I'm.
gosh.
I know, I
Yeah.
know, I know. Look, we
Just
need to
look,
have this again. Flight to Foundry, find us again. We need to do
Yes.
this again.
Next year,
Uh,
2 hours, please.
2 hours. Yeah. So I'm gonna sort of like ask one more question and then sort of like see if the chat has any questions or people want to ask questions. So I'm gonna combine sort of two of the ones I have here. I want to ask you, moving back to poetry proper.
I hadn't even looked at chat. Okay.
What kinds of ways of being in the world are you both most attracted to in the speculative poetry that by Black folks that you are reading? Um, what are you looking forward to in or hope that it exists, in the future of Black speculative poetry? And also, uh, are there any Black speculative poets you think our viewers should check out, besides everyone here, like other folks?
So, like, I'm very excited by this question because we're all editors as well,
Yeah,
Thank
yeah, yeah.
which means that a lot of our recommendations are very obviously folks that we have read and like given the opportunity that this work that this person made is really really good. You should read this thing, because I think a lot about the poetry that appeared in Fire.
Hmm.
Um, uh like there are names that just kind of pop up in my brain every once in a while, and when I see that they're tweeting, I'm like, did he do a new thing? I need to see it. Uche Ogbuji, Woody Dismukes,
Yeah.
um like absolutely, like everything that is happening in Fire right now is like worthy of your attention in my opinion, especially the poetry. I'm particularly very excited that B. Charisse Moore is now the poetry editor over there, because she is absolutely astute, absolutely brilliant. And her eye for work is really critical. So yeah, like um everything that is happening in Fire right now definitely has like the seal of approval that there are people who are telling like really engaging, really powerful black speculative poetic stories. And in particular, I think two of the things that are most engaging for me when it comes to the work that stands out to me is um, that you can simultaneously regain that dignity and describe that dignity to us without inherently assuming that dignity means that someone is right or pure or good or never messy. I like messy characters a lot, and I like the stories of messy characters. And I like telling those stories by reaffirming that just because someone has made a mistake or is prone to reacting in certain ways doesn't mean that they are not owed that dignity, because we tell and read white stories about them being owed and reclaiming that dignity all the time. But we don't tell that stories very often about black characters, and I'm really engaged by discovering more poetry and more fiction, more short fiction, more novelettes, more novellas, more novels about messy black characters who never lose their dignity or never threaten to lose their dignity in that way. So definitely more of that for me.
You made it so complex. I would, well, because I'm thinking about when I when I edited Eye to the Telescope on the Sea and didn't see the number of Black people and people of color that I wanted to, and and in doing Nombono and working really hard to get the call out, and not seeing the number of Black people and people of color that I wanted to. I mean, I'll talk numbers. So I got over 700 poems for Eye to the Telescope, but only 200 and something poems came in for Nombono. So I want to see more, period. I'm not, I say that to say I want to see more. I want to see more Black participation, more Black production, in whatever of the many genres. And you all know I have a list. I won't go through the list, but from alternative history to weird, hope punk, astro poetry. I want to see Black people writing throughout all the genres and subgenres that there exist for the speculative. I want more. I encourage people to say more. And um, I'm afraid to name names because I did make a list of Black speculative poets, and I'm willing to share it. And because there are 52 folks on the list, right? So, but I will say, but I can't avoid not naming somebody anyway. And this person does not write in the field per se, and they don't attach the word speculative to themselves, these two people. One is Alexi Pauline Gums, whose dub finding ceremony is incredibly powerful. And the other one is, I'm so in love with this man, Nathaniel Mackey, who won the National Book Award for Splay Anthem. Eroding Witness, From a Broken Bottle, Traces of Perfume Still Emanate. He began with Bedouin Hornbook in 1986, Blue Fasa, Nod House. He writes on the edge of what could be a surreal, could be speculative, and there's lots and lots of musicality to his work. He's oh, time's up. Okay, sorry.
Oh no, that wasn't that wasn't what that was. But I do want to say that people in the
But I
chat
looked at the clock and it went, and I was like, oh, they stood up.
um people in the chat were very interested in that list that you had. So I don't know if it is somewhere or if you're in the Discord or if you want to
I
send it
can
to
find it.
me and I'll put it in the Discord.
I could put it in Discord. I mean, if I was gonna, if we had 2 minutes, I was gonna just say all the names. I mean, and you're on the list, but it begins with Akeem Alexis and it ends with Ted Jones.
Okay,
Includes Bob Kaufman, Aimé César, and John Joseph, Rabia Rivello, who I didn't get to talk about. That's why we got to do this again. John Joseph Rabia Rivello, translated from the night. He is a Malagasy poet writing what I think of as speculative poetry in the 30s, and he predates the Negritude poets. And the Negritude poets were inspired by this man, this incredible, oh, it's so gorgeous. And yeah, my French is still, now worn out and rudimentary. I read him in translation, but I also read it in French. I like doing both because I get a little, I know enough to still get a little something more that these non-Black translators.
Yeah.
That's true for Aimé Césaire too, people. If you can read French at all, try and read him in French as well as in translation.
Okay. So our readers, you've got some names. So we're about 2 minutes over time, so I think I'll have to sort of close us off. Thank you so much to Akua and Brandon for coming. I always love talking to you guys.
I love talking to you guys too. And
Therese, same.
She's so fabulous. Next time you got to get her. Yeah, she's got to talk.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm just sitting here in silence because I'm like, you know what? Whatever they say, I'm just going to listen. I'm going to sit here and stare and nod. I'm like, yes, I'm writing down things. You'll all be quoted on Twitter later when I can, when I reflect on what you said. But thank you everyone who's come to our Black Speculative Poetry panel. I hope you enjoy the rest of Flights of Foundry. Thank you to the organizers for inviting us. Invite us again next year. So we have more. We need a Black speculative writing section, like an arc.
Yeah,
we need a stream. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Have a great day, everyone, wherever you are on the planet. And we'll see you around.
Peace.
Bye.